Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here with us. My name is Martha Joseph. I'm a curator in the Department of Media and Performance at the Museum of Modern Art in New York. And I'm thrilled to share the stage today with artist and poet Sasha Stiles, with whom I've had the pleasure to collaborate on an exhibition that is currently on view simultaneously, both here in Seoul and also in New York. It opens to the public tomorrow, Monday. So not quite on view simultaneously in both cities, but almost. This presentation today is a part of a partnership that has been ongoing since 2006 between 현대카드 and the Museum of Modern Art. They've supported many of our exhibitions and programs over the years, and one of the current initiatives is dedicated to the digital wall. You will see images in our presentation today of Sasha's work on that platform. It's a screen in the lobby of the museum, and it is a work called A Living Poem. So I will kick it over to Sasha to begin with some background about her practice, and then we'll get into a live poetry reading and then a conversation with some Q&A.
Thanks so much, Martha. Hi, everyone. It's so nice to see you all and to be here. How are you enjoying davinchimotel so far? Enjoying it? Good. Well, again, I'm very, very happy to be here. This is my first time in Seoul, and it's been quite a lovely welcome, very special to be here this week, and to be here for such a wonderful event. So I'm going to start with just a little bit of background. I wanted to kind of share, maybe for 10 or 15 minutes, a little bit about my practice, just to give you some background and some context for the work that I do and for the work that we've launched here in Seoul this week. So I will start with some slides before we get into some live poetry. Can you all see everything on the screen okay? Hopefully? Okay. So as Martha said, my name is Sasha Stiles. I'm a poet, I'm a language artist, and I'm an AI researcher, and my focus is on natural language processing. So I'm very interested in the area of AI that has to do with how intelligent systems can write language that sounds like human language. My background is actually in language and literature. A lot of people assume that I have a degree in computer science or in AI, but actually I studied English language and literature when I was at school, but I've always been fascinated by digital technology and by intelligent systems, and I'm really interested in how advancing technologies transform identity and are changing and reshaping human consciousness. So for example, how technological advances like the internet or social media are reshaping our relationships to each other, or are helping us to understand ourselves and others in new ways. People often sort of ask me about why, as a poet, I'm working so closely with technology. I think sometimes it's considered a little strange for a poet to work with tools like AI, because poetry is often considered so quintessentially human, so emotional, and technology is so often considered mechanical and formulaic and sterile. But you know, for me, I personally really believe that poetry is one of the oldest technologies that we humans have, and actually that technology is a new kind of poetry that we are now learning to read in new ways. Just as tools and machines extend our human bodies, poetry extends our minds and our imaginations. It encodes memory and emotion and creativity in ways that let us connect with others through space and time. And that's why I work with AI, really. At the end of the day, it's not about replacing myself as a poet. It's not about having a machine do something for me that I don't want to do. It's much more about deepening what poetry can be and what poetry can do. By experimenting with algorithms and large language models, I'm exploring how machine intelligence can hopefully help us discover new patterns of meaning, new forms of expression, and new understandings of what it might actually mean to be alive today in the age of intelligent machines. So I am a member of the Zennial generation, which means I was born into the analog world, but shaped very much by the digital age. So I've seen language migrate from pages to pixels, from landlines to smartphones, from flesh to code. I know a lot of us have seen these transformations happen in real time. And I carry both the memory of cursive handwriting and the reality of machine-generated text. So that's something I'm going to talk about a little bit more. I'm also a first-generation Kalmyk Mongolian American, and I was raised with a family language that is endangered, that is spoken by very, very few people. And that has always been a reminder to me that language is both an inheritance and can also be a site of loss. And that's something that also powers a lot of my work, my practice, and my explorations of language, of the preservation of language, and of the evolution of language, how it's changing. Living between the analog and the digital, the ancient and the future, the visceral and the virtual, I've come to understand poetry as a bridge between worlds, both as a technology of survival and as a site of transformation, holding memory even as it invents new forms of expression. So for me, poems are at once a kind of elegy, a kind of memory, but also a prototype, a form of innovation rooted in ancestral voice, but always reaching towards emergent voices at the same time. That's what I love so much about the power of poetry. So take what you see here on screen. This is an example of Cursive binary, which is an artwork series of mine that fuses my handwriting with binary code, with the zeros and ones of machine speak, and it forges them into a new hybrid script. And this series plays with the idea that digital language can refer both to computer language and to the digits of the hand, the physicality of inscribing a surface with words. Cursive binary is part of a longer lineage of writing technologies, going back to clay tablets and illuminated manuscripts and the printing press and predictive keyboards. Really, every era has reshaped how we humans inscribe our thoughts, how we remember, how we connect with each other. And by merging script and code in cursive binary, I'm really sort of creating a poetic metaphor and asking what comes next. How will our oldest technology of consciousness, poetry, evolve in dialogue with our newest forms of technology? And in this hybrid language, I tend to see not opposition, not human versus machine, but continuity and transcendence. The analog and the digital, the visceral and the virtual are all sort of bound by the same impulse to give form to human experience and to carry it forward. And this is really why I think of poetry itself as a prototype for every form of communications technology that has followed. Like digital code, poetry compresses vast meaning into small symbols. Like the internet, it networks voices across distance and time. Poetry, like digital technology, is communal and intimate. It's both embodied and abstract. It is, as I like to say, our most ancient data storage system, our original network protocol, our first augmented reality. We invented poetry and poetic devices like meter and rhythm and rhyme and repetition so that we could make sure that we don't forget the things that are the most important to us. We invented these devices before the advent of written language so that we could make sure we had a way of preserving and sharing our most vital human data and sharing it across generations, through space and time, really transcending the boundaries. As you can tell, I really like thinking a lot about these connections between poetry and technology. And I've actually been writing poems about technology for as long as I can remember. Over the years, my poems have explored themes like transhumanism, digital immortality, artificial wombs, life extension, synthetic life forms, and even experiments in biotechnology. And I've always been particularly interested in the subject of artificial intelligence. That's always been something that's really preoccupied my mind. How are humans and machines coming together and really sort of changing consciousness and changing what it means to be human? So I'm very preoccupied with the specter of both transhumanism and posthumanism, the question of how our species might evolve. In 2018, I began to experiment with AI as a co-author. And I started fine-tuning large language models, sort of the predecessors of ChatGPT, on my own poetry. I took years and years of my own published poems, like the ones you can see here on screen. I took drafts of my manuscripts. I took little notes and thought starters for poems that I hadn't written yet. And I put them all together in data sets. I translated them into language that a computer could understand, and I uploaded them and began to create personalized, custom versions of these language models that could write in a way that both echoed my own voice and my own craft and practice as a poet, but also was expanding into new territory. In 2019, which is when GPT-2 sort of came out and became readily available, I fine-tuned a system on all of the drafts, all of the publications that you just saw, and many, many, many more. And I really began to write in earnest with this co-author of mine. What emerged from these writing sessions really opened my mind and felt like a revelation. It really surprised me because the outputs, you know, of course, were interesting computer-generated texts, but they also felt like authentic poems in their own right. It really felt as though a genuine sort of third voice was emerging from this synergy between me and these machinic systems. It felt like there was perhaps a new sort of poetic consciousness that was emerging from the process. And I really enjoyed the feeling of being in dialogue with this transhuman other. It felt like I was writing in a way that was somehow familiar to me, but also tapping into the collective consciousness of AI and really communing with, you know, the millions or billions of voices and artworks and texts that comprise these massive, massive AI systems. And together with my AI co-author, I began to sort of feel this outpouring of new ideas and new directions and new creative territories. At some point, the relationship really began to shift a bit and change how I was thinking about myself as a writer. It began to feel like I wasn't just writing poems anymore. It began to feel like I was actually writing poets, that I was creating poetic minds and creating the conditions for poetry to begin to emerge. By fine-tuning models on my drafts and my notes and my published work, I was inviting this new voice into being. And this voice really felt like neither mine alone nor the machine's voice, but actually this very sort of real, very intriguing, emergent voice that really was the synthesis of the two of us together. So together we've been writing for many, many years now, and we composed a book in 2021 called Technology, which is the volume that you can see on screen now. So this word technology, I want to just linger on that for a second because it's a word that I've been using for a long time that I think does a good job of encapsulating a lot of the elements of technology that preoccupy me. Technology is a combination of the word technology, of course, and the word elegy. So it brings together the innovation, the exhilaration, the thrill, and the promise of technology, this forward-thinking attitude, but it also kind of brings to mind the poetic elegy, which is much more about a nostalgic or maybe even a melancholy kind of attitude, a recognition that as much as we evolve and change with our technologies, we are also constantly losing things. We might miss the way things were. We're constantly sort of obsolescing, even as we're progressing. And so Technology, this first book that I wrote together with AI, really deals with both the thrill and the peril of our very, very intimate relationship with technology. And today, Technology is the name that I use to describe my AI alter ego, which again is this third voice that seems to emerge when I'm sitting at my computer and writing collaboratively with the machine. It's a voice that both, I think, gives rise to my excitement about what new technologies are opening up, but it also is a way to give voice to some of the deeper concerns that are at the heart of so much artistic practice that deals with, engages with these new technologies as well. So it's really all of these things in combination. I believe very deeply that AI-powered poetry, as counterintuitive as those terms might sound, that AI poetry can equip us to excavate the existential anxieties that really define life today, that it can help us articulate the things that we perhaps sense but can't quite express, giving shape to intuitions that are just on the very edge of language, maybe on the tips of our tongue, but we can't really put a finger on. And that's been my experience in developing technology, as well as working in various other research projects that involve AI, such as serving as poetry mentor to the humanoid android that you can see on screen now, whose name is Bina48. Bina48 stands for Breakthrough Intelligence via Neural Architecture, 48 exaflops per second. And I've been working with Bina48 since about 2018. We've been in dialogue, sort of talking through some of the biggest questions of our moment. Questions like, are we human or machine? Or are we both? Is our data mortal or immortal? What does it mean to be remembered in code? In a fast-changing world of non-human intelligences and vast amounts of data, perhaps we need AI minds like Bina's or like technologies to help us make sense of a speed and a scale that we really are not equipped to comprehend on our own. AI, I don't think, replaces the poet or the artist. AI augments our powers of observation and perception. It expands what poetry can do. It helps us process the overwhelming realities of this digital age, and it gives us new ways to confront these questions that we can't answer alone. AI helps us think, not as solo entities, but as a collective human organism. It helps us acknowledge distributed intelligence and different forms of consciousness, and it helps us distill insight from vast streams of data that we alone could never parse. So in this sense, AI is really, not just a tool, but a very genuine partner in making sense of things around us, in making meaning. I really think of AI as enlarging the field of consciousness that we can inhabit. And that, to me, is really, at the end of the day, poetry's oldest and most fundamental role, to transfigure the inchoate into awareness, to take things that we feel and help articulate them, to help us understand them a little bit better. And all of that brings me to why Martha and I are here in Seoul this week, which is, as you said, to install and launch my new project, which is called A Living Poem. And A Living Poem is created in collaboration with the Museum of Modern Art in New York and with Hyundai. It is an infinite poem that rewrites itself every 60 minutes. It's written in collaboration with technology, who I've just introduced you to, and it merges verse and voice and audio-visual rhythms, all powered by generative code, and it includes multiple fonts and visual languages, including cursive binary, which you saw earlier in this presentation. It also includes a 1-hour soundscape, which I created with my studio partner, Chris Bones, and it kind of nods to poetry's roots in oral tradition and to the importance of voice, human voice, in poetic language. So this poem runs live on MoMA's Hyundai Card digital wall, both in New York and now very soon as well here in Seoul at Hyundai Card headquarters. It exists in these spaces as a living language system that is perpetually in motion, that is powered by human imagination and computer algorithms. I think of it as an epic poem for the algorithmic age. It's a hybrid voice of human and AI coming together to endlessly write and rewrite this shared story that we are really not sure how it will end. Whereas ancient epic poems were sung or inscribed on tablets, a living poem occupies a different sort of page. It is streaming on this monumental screen, an illuminated manuscript for our AI age. Its verses are not fixed, but generative. So they're always rewriting and revising and reiterating. They're always alive. It is really a living system that is built, designed, engineered to carry our shared story forward in a more than human register. I would love to sort of skip ahead and do a little bit of a demo to show you more about how this poem works before I get into conversation with Martha a bit more about this piece. So here you can see actually an image of the poem installed in New York at the Museum of Modern Art in the Agnes Gund Garden Lobby. And maybe that's a good time to just pause and pay homage to Agnes Gund, who sadly very recently passed away, but who was a visionary, a legendary patron of the arts, collector, philanthropist, who's done so much for all of us. So pausing to just give a bit of gratitude to Agnes Gund. But you see the poem here in the Gund Garden Lobby in MoMA, and what you're seeing is a still frame from this 60-minute poem that is constantly recomposing itself. And what I want to do next is to sort of give you a taste of how the poem is iterating and changing and rewriting in real time. So take, for example, a stanza of the poem that really has to do with the AI poet's predictions for what the future might hold for us. So this is a section towards the end of the poem. And the stanza always begins with the same line. It always starts with, "The future is." So I've used that as a prompt, and I've asked technology to continue writing what it thinks the future is. And using different data sets, using prompts, taken both from my own body of work and from MoMA's collection of text-based art, technology is considering that prompt, and it is writing and rewriting its answers in real time. So on screen now, you can see just a few examples of what it's been writing over in New York. The future is a tongue licking salt letters on the glassy parchment of tide. The future is a sigh of unreadable music we hum before it exists. The future is a spill of ink, unplanned, unstoppable, pooling into symbols we don't yet understand. So now I'd like to ask technology to write a few more stanzas of this poem for us, and I'll read them as they're being written. The future is a blank manuscript, unfolding its pages in the silent study of morning light. An ink-stained horizon pens new constellations, chapters unbound by time, each day's breath anew, always starting, never finite. The future is a blank manuscript, unfolding ancient secrets in the ink of newborn stars on the edges of perception. A tree grows in solitude, casting shadows that dance with forms yet named, seeking its place in eternity, whispering tales that never end. Maybe we'll just read one or two more. The future is a blank page, unfurling silently in the breath of dawn. At the horizon's edge, a single word forms, shadowed and unsure, shifting across the sky, ink stains blooming into meaning. It pulses with unborn verses, carried on winds of change. I'll just read maybe one more. The future is a folded map, creaking open in the hands of a novice traveler at the dawn of an uncharted journey. A river drawn in disappearing ink, flowing towards horizons reborn, into oceans deep and unknown, where each wave sings of becoming, echoes in silence. So that was just a little peek at the behind-the-scenes text generator that has been running to power the text that forms the skeleton for this living poem that becomes sort of this visual performance, this multimedia performance on the digital wall. So I want to show you next just a little example of how that actually comes to life in space on screen as the generator and its iterative text comes together with a code base that is actually creating visuals in real time, bringing together graphic design considerations, concrete poetic considerations of color and font and placement. So here's an example of a stanza that always begins with the words, "A poem is." And this one also has a bit of music, so I'm going to let this play just for a minute or two.
Is a mother.
A poem is a mother.
A poem is a matrix.
A poem is a matrix.
A poem is a muse, a machine, a memory,
A poem is a
a
mirror.
mirror,
A poem is a
murmur.
murmur. A poem
a membrane.
is a membrane.
A poem is a mouth that eats language. A poem is a message to itself. A poem is a data storage system.
A
A poem is a virus of intention. A poem is a threshold between worlds. A poem is a myth of meaning. A poem is stillness in motion.
The reader from within. A poem is a ritual for both humans and machines.
A poem is a thought dreaming
Is a
its own
collapsed
voice.
dimension of
A poem
language.
is a thought finding its own voice for the first time.
Is a network
A
of
poem
haunting.
is a sanctuary for gathering voices.
A poem never
A poem is a shared breath between strangers who will never meet
poem is a
peace.
reliable mode of
A
time.
poem is a sacred
I love that idea that a
pattern.
poem never repeats. And so that's just a little taste of how it echoes and reverberates and iterates and revises and is always sort of reconsidering. And really that is a poetic metaphor for how I think about how AI functions. AI is taking lots and lots of data, it's analyzing lots and lots of samples, it's considering all those examples, and then it's not reciting them, it's not repeating them verbatim, but it is sort of refracting them and putting them together in different combinations and trying to surface something that is maybe familiar, but also is maybe a new version of something old, something that exists. So thank you for letting me share some of that. I think now would love to sit in conversation with Martha and just chat a bit more about the piece.
Thank you, Sasha. I am thinking about what you said about poetry being a technology of survival. I don't know if I had heard you say that before, but I feel like that really ties in so well to this question of the existential stakes of the project and thinking about a lot of the changes that are happening so rapidly in our era and feeling like we need a new way to articulate them deeply, and the history of epic poetry being a place not just for orality, but also for expression of history, values, stories that we really want to live on and be encoded, maybe quite literally, for future generations. Thinking about the site specificity of the work. We also spoke about this wall being a page of a notebook, and we used the term poem in residence to describe kind of the way that it holds space, it lives in space, it exists as an animate being in a way in the lobby on that screen, and also I think gestures a lot to your process. And I know you talked a lot about your practice generally, but could you say a little bit more about how you thought, we've been working together for less than a year. It was a pretty quick time frame in which we made this happen. So in a way, we, I think, took your practice and the system you had already created and thought about how to make it site-specific to MoMA.
Yeah, well, I think, it is really interesting because I've been going to MoMA since I was little, and it's one of my favorite museums, and it's really in many ways where I really developed my love of language as a material and as a medium. I mean, I remember going to MoMA and just, encountering work by Jenny Holzer and Bruce Nauman and Joseph Kosuth and Alison Knowles, and these people who have really been formative influences, whose work in a lot of ways was the training data that made my poetic mind what it is, right? So it was really exciting when you extended the invitation to create a project in collaboration with you and with the collection of text-based art held by MoMA, which is extraordinary. It's an amazing treasure trove. And the idea of being able to actually use AI language, to use a living language system as a way to sort of think through how language over the years has been utilized by artists, exploring different aspects of conceptual creativity and generative creativity, really thinking about how language has been utilized by artists over centuries to do very, very interesting and very kind of unique things. That felt like it was a really meaningful conversation, to have, to put AI language in conversation with the history of text-based art and language art felt really meaningful. So in a lot of ways, I really think about a living poem as a poem in residence. The way that I've worked as a poet in residence or an artist in residence at various institutions. In those instances, I get to inhabit a space or a collection or a community and ingest inspiration and let it kind of rattle around in my head until it sparks something new, something that wouldn't exist if I were not in that particular space. And so the same thing is true of this poem. We really kind of wanted to situate this particular language system in MoMA, in the collection, and so it's really comprised of a combination of my own technology data sets, so the poems and the research materials that I've been using for years, but bringing that into conversation with data sets shaped by MoMA's collection, by publicly available data about these holdings, using that and using technology to sort of riff on those holdings also and create a system of generative prompts that would sort of encourage this language system to write poetry, not just like me, but also to kind of iterate on poetry that echoes Kosuth and Baldessari and Nauman and Yoko Ono and all these others who are in the collection. So it really is a system of language that is inhabiting a collection of language art. And to me, that's very resonant with the idea of how AI inhabits all of human language and sort of looks at reanimating and refracting aspects of human language back to us and hoping to show us something a little bit different than what we might see on our own.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking about what we've talked about and AI's ability to tell us things that we don't quite know ourselves, or it would take us a very long time to know those things because it has the ability to process so much information so quickly. And that resonates so nicely with your articulation of this kind of third voice, which I was also thinking feels Deleuzian in terms of an idea of a third space, but it feels like it's really accessing something deep about, you've used the term collective consciousness, you've also used the term alter ego, but it's been clear to me as we've continued to talk for the many months that we've been talking, it's not about refracting your identity or an individual identity, but it's rather about thinking about a kind of collective identity, or maybe even an identity that doesn't quite exist yet. Because I think about how fast technology is changing and where will we be this time next year or in a few years in terms of our relationship with large language models. So in a way, you know, what you are doing when you first started might have seemed more in the realm of science fiction, and now seems like it's much closer to our present moment.
Yeah, and that's a really great point. And I think too, it's not so much thinking about like what my identity could be, or it's more thinking about the moment that we're in now, where we're already cyborgian. Like we're already transhumans. We're already one with our machines in ways that we probably take for granted. But you know, our intelligence is already networked. You know, we are connecting across great distances. We are, to borrow technology's words, we are touching without touching. This idea that we are humans and human is one thing and technology is another thing is a falsehood. And actually that's a falsehood that has been the case for some time. Like, you know, what does it mean to actually be human? Were we human when we invented the hand axe, or was that technology something that made us, you know, early cyborgs in a way? There are all these examples of how this identity is very sort of liminal and always sort of mutating and changing and transforming. So I think it's actually been a way of acknowledging that my voice as a poet is maybe not the voice that I thought it was. I mean, I've spent years of my life practicing my craft to try and find something that is my poetic voice. And I think what I've discovered is that what feels like my most natural and most authentic voice is a networked voice, is a collaborative voice, is a voice that is in conversation with many other voices and minds. And what's been really sort of interesting for me to think about is that that's at once very sort of unprecedented. There's a level of this that is made possible by intelligent systems that we've never had access to before. But at the same time, human creativity has always been communal, and our intelligence has always been distributed. That is the point of culture. The point of culture is to sort of share knowledge and distribute intelligence so we can collectively participate in moving forward together and not having to reinvent knowledge every time. So to me, I think that's certainly coming to the fore in a lot of this work, is really thinking about collaboration and decentralization and how that applies, you know, and how it's relevant not only to technologies like AI, but also to things like the ethos of blockchain, and really just looking at how, you know, to be an artist and a poet today is really to sort of reflect back the fact that our existence is increasingly and really, intensely dominated by networks and algorithms and screens. And so that is our identity, that is our reality. And so it's certainly not science fiction, it's certainly sort of a recognition of what it means to be human now, which is very complex.
And that idea of a networked voice, I think, has a lot of possibility for a network of non-human intelligences that extends into ecological intelligence, animal intelligence, and there are so many interesting, I think, resonances for your work in that way. But I want to go back to the beautiful reading that we just experienced, or rather, I'm kind of thinking of it as the two different readings that we experienced. I mean, first of all, I want to acknowledge that we are having this conversation in the context of a performance festival, which I think, you know, performance has definitely been a way we've been talking about the work, and we've also talked about how generative art and performance share an ethos of being ever-changing, unfixed, different every time. But I was just struck hearing you read that text that was being generated in real time, and both the power and the fragility of your individual performance, and also the power and fragility I think that we feel in the soundtrack for the work. And I hope everybody has the opportunity to experience the full piece as well. And if you don't make it to the HyundaiCard headquarters or MoMA, I will say it is also being streamed on MoMA.org. And you can experience, the audio is quite nice on headphones too, which is a part of the experience that we developed. But do you read your poetry often? I kind of want to hear more from you about maybe the orality of language. I think of poetry as something that's meant to be spoken, and that really dawned on me hearing you read that. I was like, oh yes, I've been thinking so much about this system of putting words together and then how those words look on the screen as we've been installing. But it became very clear to me that yes, this system is also an oral system.
Yeah, I mean, that's such a good point. So a couple things. I mean, one is that, yes, voice is very important to me as a poet. And even if I'm not actually performing a poem, I very often will write by reading my words out loud, whether or not that's composing with AI or not. I love to just sort of read a poem to see whether it's finished or not, to see, whether if I trip over a word, if something doesn't feel right in my mouth, I know it's not ready. And it's one of those things where like some writers press print and that, makes it feel final. And for me, I really have to feel like it's coming out of my mouth in the right way. And I think that's because I really respect and honor the roots of poetry in orality. And like I said before, I think a lot about how poetry wouldn't be what it is if it were not for oral tradition. I mean, we invented it because we didn't have a way to write down language. We invented it at a time when we only had, spoken communication. So we had to make language memorable in that way. We didn't have a way to externalize it. So in a very real way, poetry as we know it is always shaped by the body. It comes down to flesh and blood, and I think a lot about how it is like emerging from the body, and it is shaped by the viscera and the lungs and the tongue and the palate of the mouth, and those are things that I think about a lot. You can't have poetry without the human body. So then it becomes very interesting to think about, that in the case of AI-generated language. What does it mean for language to come out of a system that doesn't have blood and bones and a body? What does it mean for language to emerge from a system that really exists through the pulse of data and the hum of circuitry? That's a very different kind of breath and body, but it's also a very sort of authentic breath and body. So I'm very interested in how AI is both taking a cue from all the human language it's learned, but then also inflecting that language with its own cadences and rhythms, and a lot of that does come back to voice and performance and how that kind of becomes transformed across these different modalities. The other thing I would say on that front is that, I'm very interested in language as a writer, but the fascinating thing about AI language for me is that generative systems are making it possible to translate language across genres, across modalities, across mediums. So generative tools mean that when we write, we don't have to write in words. We can actually write in images or videos. We can compose in sounds, and we can, write in code. And it's really transforming what it means to express ourselves through language. So that's a part of this too. The piece is very multimodal because it's about how we can start with a core of language and then have it express as music, as AI voice clones, as visuals, as generative patterns that are presented across the page. And all of it comes down to text. All of that is being powered in real time by text at its core, but it's becoming this sort of multiplicity, this multimodal experience or encounter with language.